Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. Today we have Mike again from Genuine Chit-Chat, a person who is no longer a guest. He casually shows up here in the podcast. We love talking about Star Wars as two fans who come from completely different backgrounds. Today's topic is villains in Star Wars trilogies. Before we get there, Mike, please say hello. Tell us how are you doing.
Well, hello there to everyone. If you haven't seen me before, I've got two podcasts. But before I say that, I'm just going to clarify for any people who have seen me numerous times, you will see that, and you'll be able to hear as well that I have got a cold. So I apologize for that. And if I clear my throat halfway through a sentence or anything like that, I'll try and be courteous. But yeah, I got back from holiday and I haven't got COVID. I've checked and things. I've just got a bit of a cold, so raspy voice. But yes, I have two podcasts. I've got Genuine Chit-Chat and I also have Star Wars Comics and Canon. And Genuine Chit-Chat is a podcast I talk to a variety of different people from non-Star Wars stuff and Star Wars stuff. I recently spoke with Cavan Scott, so that was quite enjoyable. So if you want to check that out, go over to the YouTube channel of Genuine Chit-Chat. And on there'll be the playlists for all the other Star Wars Comics and Canon stuff. And you can find both of those things on any podcast app as well. So lots of places you can find me, and I've done the whole spiely intro thing on many of the other videos with Ben. So if you want to hear the whole thing, go check out all the other videos I've been on and you'll get the gist of what I'm about.
Mike, congratulations on scoring Cavan Scott. I absolutely love the guy. I
He's
love
amazing.
what he brings to the table, how he innovates, and his unique voice kind of like takes us to the new generation of Star Wars, but at the same time it adheres to all these canonical things. Like, he just understands the DNA so well, and he's just such a gracious person and such a gentleman. Like, I was completely captivated. I listened to the whole thing like once and then once and a half. It was just like playing in the background, just listening to his voice and talk so passionately about Star Wars. And I gotta say, once again, man, you are an excellent interviewer. I'm aspiring to get to that level. Yeah,
well, I've been doing it now 5 years, so it's been a long time.
And it shows, man. It really shows. Like, you're conduct the conversation, changing gears from one topic to the next so seamlessly. It really feels like I was sitting there next to you guys. I'm like, oh, can I ask the question now for Cavan Scott? Like, I felt that I'm in the room with you guys. It was so awesome. Guys, I encourage everyone, go check out that interview. I'll provide the link to that specific interview as well, right? So you guys could go check it out. It's just brilliant stuff. But we're here to talk about Star Wars villains. And, you and I have discussed Star Wars prequels. We have talked about the original saga. We'll talk about trilogy. We always find interesting topics to discuss. This time I wanted to touch specifically about the villains in cinema and then kind of like digested what it means for Star Wars in general. What do we enjoy about our villains? What did we think works in any particular Star Wars film? But how would we also fix things that we didn't enjoy? Because, guys, quick a refresher. Both Mike and I have PhDs in filmmaking and writing. We're complete experts on cinema. We're obviously going to share our opinions here. By the way, it was just a pun, guys. We are just two schmucks talking about Star Wars. We just love that stuff. Anyway, we're going to try to run through all three trilogies and take a closer look at things and our personal perspectives, where we come from. But before that, I just wanted to speak to you generally about villains in cinema. And my first question to you is, what the heck makes a great villain?
Yeah, it's one of those things I've heard people say about a lot of types of movies, is that a film is only as good as the villain. And that happens with a lot of movies. You've got things like Die Hard, that's got Hans Gruber, who is iconic, played by the late Alan Rickman. You've got other films which are like more franchise things, like Harry Potter with Voldemort, or you've got many of the Marvel films and things. You have to have someone who is... There's various camps of what can make a villain. You've got the kind of which are just big and powerful and ominous and things, and you're just scared of their power, and they're very straight, and it's very much, just overwhelming power and authority. Then you've got the other ones that are like wild cards and crazy and unpredictable, and you don't know what they're going to do. Yeah. And you've also got the sort of charming ones and things. And I think the through line for most of them is that they want what most people don't want, and in having that causes severe harm or problems to the world in which they exist in. That, I think, is generally what a villain does. I mean, there's obviously the type of thing which is antagonist. They antagonize the protagonist. But there's a lot of films where you've got like anti-heroes and things, and you've got characters that antagonize others, but they're not necessarily villains. So I think it's specifically for me, I interpret it as, someone who wants to damage, destroy, or severely change or hurt the world around them, that's going to be in theory, net bad for what the current sort of universe is. And I think a lot of that comes from needing to have an established, believable environment to play in, either being things like the MCU, Star Wars, Harry Potter, etc., or being more realistic in like Die Hard and knowing a character and meeting, Hans Gruber is a believable villain. So it's kind of depending on the universe you're in, depends on what characteristics one would want. And it kind of falls into those general camps for me. Do you define them as something similar or something different?
Well, first of all, I really love your extensive framing, like how you put it together. You're basically going right into the nitty-gritty of it and talking about the function of a villain as a storytelling device, what their purpose is in the story. And we're obviously going to get to this, but I really, really enjoy your, breaking this down. For me, I was sort of thinking a bit more on the surface with this. And to me, it's first and foremost, like just going back to early childhood, what villains impressed me. So what is that impression? What kind of thoughts did it leave with me? A, they got to be memorable. Whether they scared you, to death, and you're like, oh my God, I can't watch this anymore, and I remember watching the Alien movies, right? The Ridley Scott original and then James Cameron sequel. They used to terrify me. The xenomorphs were just ferocious, terrible creatures that I thought they're going to jump out of the shadow, out of the corner and grab me. That's how scared I was of them. But something kept me from like stopping watching. I always came back to them. I was like, why is this? They are memorable. And I think a lot of it is, first of all, appearance, a very unique design, a specific color palette, a very, very particular silhouette, how they look like, how you can almost smell and touch it, especially, me being, raised with 80s movies where this is pre-CGI kind of like era, where even though it's a fictional character, but it's like a prosthetic or animatronic, it still felt so real. You as a child didn't understand the wizardry behind the cinema, and you just understood that what you're seeing on the screen is real and therefore terrifying. So for me, it was always that like seismic kind of like reaction on me, that it impressed upon my childhood mind what they look like, but also what they do in the story. What do they make us feel? We either hate them or we want the good guy just to rally all the forces of goodness and destroy them. You sort of started getting into my second question. I also wanted to ask you, what is the function of the villain in relationship to the protagonist? What is he set out to do? What is his utility to the story?
Yeah, I think just to go against it, and in most movies, I find that the antagonist is just bad and they have this opinion, and it's just like go against what the good guy wants, normally some sort of ridiculous evil or getting loads of money or blowing stuff up, things like that. But I found that in especially more modern villains and some of the more complex villains, they can even change the perspective of the main hero, which can be a lot of the villains where they are used simultaneously as a plot device, but also an enhancement of a story arc or a character arc. And I think some of those villains are some of the most memorable ones as well. Well, I know I keep saying it's because the MCU have got so many different villains. Unfortunately, there's loads of really non-memorable ones. But one of the ones that comes to mind is Killmonger in Black Panther. He changes T'Challa's mind. And there's characters like that, which happen in a lot of cinema, where they are important to the plot, but the majority of the time it's just they want to watch the whole world burn sort of thing.
Yeah. It's when I think about heroes and villains, there's this idea that sits in my mind that we as audience and somebody who sits down by the campfire and absorbs a story, we all sort of operate from this commonality, from this common theme or common thought that generally most human beings are good people. And in order to sustain, have a fruitful civilization and have happy lives with our neighbors and support the people around us, we sort of like watch a story and we see that the hero represents most of us versus a villain who represents a very small group of people. And as I get deeper into it and I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, so the hero must, I guess I have a very classical kind of like traditional view on these two archetypes. The hero represents to me the creative forces, everything that is there to support and sustain life, right? And the villain represents the destructive forces. He's there to destroy whatever his hero is set out to do, as you have formulated. And it's never, a good story is never about one overshadowing the other. Even though in a classical sense, the hero always defeats the villain, there's always an equal and opposite presence of both in the story. Right. By the end, of course, in the classical sense, the hero goes out there and he smites the villain and he's victorious and the sun rises again and everybody lives happily after. But the villain also dominates a more major portion of the story. And in a way, in a sense, it shows you that whatever threat he represents is a mainstay in nature. Right, we can observe the sunlight, but we can also observe the darkness in the night. And sometimes, when we have to say goodbye to our loved ones, let's say, right, or when a certain culture is being wiped off the face of the planet, sometimes you also have to accept that part. That without that integral shadow, without that destructive force, you can't truly appreciate who the hero is.
Yeah, it's the yin and the yang. It's the balance of everything. It's you can't have a hero without a villain, and it's the alpha and the omega, which is one of the oldest stories, isn't it? It's the creator and the destroyer both being part of this one deity, and that is how existence occurs. It's even you go deeper than that. It's the life cycle, of forest is always a good example. The trees get, the leaves die and then they fall to the ground, and then they create life for smaller creatures, and it goes in a cycle. So in that realm, a lot of elements of good and evil and those sort of ideas just come from the universal stem of kind of, in simplistic terms, light and death, which can also be signified through light being alive and then darkness being lack of life and things like that. So I think it's just one of those things where everything would just be gray. Otherwise, it would just be this even complete gray everywhere. And if you split it into real thinking about it in abstract forms, black and white, that sort of, I just think of them like ink blots, like the yin and yang things. So it's just like that. And yeah, if you just mix them all together, it's just all gray. And that doesn't, especially in earlier storytelling and things, when you wanted something slightly more simple as a plot device, but you want the characters' journeys to be different, you need to kind of have these point A and point B, like what's causing the disequilibrium and everything. And you need something or someone to cause that, as opposed to, apart from very small amount of films where there is no necessarily villain in air quotes. But even then you can normally construe one.
Yeah. And I think it is that specific contrast between the two that makes a story memorable for us. I want you to kind of like go back to the past and, think a little bit about what things were impressed upon you when you were a kid, and give us a couple of examples of the definitive like villains that you enjoyed.
So one of them is actually from a video game, and it's Ganondorf, or Ganon, as many people may know. So he's from the Legend of Zelda games, and in I think every iteration bar, I think Link's Awakening and like one or two others, he's the villain. He's always the big bad at the end. He is the complete opposite to the character you're playing as, which is Link, and he's part of the Triforce. And sorry, my chair's falling down. That was embarrassing. You just see me slowly falling bit by bit. But yeah, anyway, he's the power, and Link is meant to be sort of courage and things, and he comes in so many different forms. But my favorite form of his is from a game called Twilight Princess, and that is he's just this big, imposing. He's got this dark silhouette. He's so powerful and commanding, and he is so opposite to the character you're playing as Link, which is small and nimble and fast, and just this huge character. And when you're playing a video game, especially when you're going against a villain like that, the sense of power, that if you're fighting a hard boss and you lose, you can die easily. Well, in the cinema experience, it's slightly different, but in the video game realm of something like Legend of Zelda, which has such rich lore, it's just a character that I really appreciate. It was always exciting to see him when a new game would come out. I'd be like, oh, what's Ganon going to look like? What's the battle with Ganon going to be like? So I really enjoyed seeing different variations of that, even if there were ones I didn't like as much, like in Wind Waker, there's a pig one and things like that. I didn't know, have you played the Legend of Zelda games much? I know
I'm a big fan. I did not beat many of them. I pretty much own every single Zelda they came out in either digital or physical form. Most of them I have physically. My favorite one is Breath of the Wild. And I really, really enjoy that you brought this up, because I think the designers behind this game, from the first game to the last, have made this very conscious effort to create Link as a template for the hero, right? There's a classical Japanese genre of role-playing games where the protagonist never speaks, because the designers want the young player. Generally, those games, especially in the mid-90s, were created for children. And when you sat down and you played those characters, you tried to play pretend to be them. You interacted with the game, which is a beautiful thing. And you're absolutely right. The Ganondorf, when you look at him, he is just this representation of evil. He's not necessarily a character per se, because Zelda games have humongous lore, but they're never are known for narrative storytelling. The story exists in the world, and when you look at this Ganondorf, he represents this evil supreme without necessarily breaking down to you. It's almost like I would compare it to something like the evil mask hanging on your wall. And you look at it, it's like, oh, I understand what that signifies.
Yeah, exactly. He's the personification of pure evil. And Link is meant to be combined with Zelda, the pure light. And that's what kind of forms it together. It's a very mythological based world because, there's not much story to any of the Zelda games, even the best ones like Twilight Princess. It's more like the lore. It's like, oh, there's this whole other world you can go into. There's all this darkness. It's not because the hero's journey in Zelda are pretty much all the same. And that's fine. It's just what kind of theme, what environment do you put these archetypal characters in? Because their journey isn't the important thing. It's the world around you get absorbed in when you're experiencing it.
Give me a couple name drops as well, and just so we can get to our Star Wars conversation. But I really want to kind of like situate myself what sort of villains you enjoyed when you were a kid.
So Harry Potter was a huge part of my life. So I was basically the exact age of Harry Potter as it was as it was coming out. So me and my generation, us millennials, pretty much everyone who I know who's my age, at the minimum, doesn't mind Harry Potter, but most people enjoy it, and a lot of people love it. And I am one of those people. Megan loves Harry Potter like I love Star Wars, but I love Harry Potter. It's one of my, apart from Star Wars, is one of my main favorite things. I adore it. And the villain in that primarily is Voldemort. And he's just another iconic villain in so many ways. He is, in a lot of ways, he's very opposite to Darth Vader visually. Yet he still brings the same level of fear and authority. He is very skinny and very pale and he's humanoid, but he's human has been turned to like a different thing, almost like a gremlin or something that's less human. Obviously the nose losing part is the main thing, and long fingernails and stuff. And it's like this monstrous form, but he's still very commanding and he's so unbelievably powerful. Everyone's just stricken by fear. And that's a lot what Vader's like. Vader's got this power and these things that, compared to Voldemort, I think Vader probably influenced the writing of Voldemort in some ways, but then I think Vader's one of the greatest villains ever, but we'll get to that. But I think that Voldemort is a really good one for like a new generation of people, and I think he works so well as a villain because he is charismatic, which is different from like Vader, for example.
Right.
There are things he says which he has not necessarily a back and forth, but he is someone he's a leader. He brings loads of dark wizards together. He tries to control the wizarding world. And in that power, he's not just a lone lunatic going after an antagonist. He's someone who's rallying people. He is like a darkness that's shrouding over the world in essence. And I think he's just, I really like him as a villain, even though he doesn't do necessarily a huge amount that different to what villains before him. But I just think that all the elements they tried with him, they worked very well.
In other words, he doesn't reinvent the wheel, but what he stands for is really, really memorable.
That's a very short and much more concise way of saying it.
Nice. Yeah, I had a couple of my childhood favorites as well. You know, I don't know how well acquainted you are. Recently, they tried to remake the Ray Harryhausen's original Clash of the Titans, which I thought the first remake was like pretty decent. I never got a chance to see the second one. I was like, it was okay, but nowhere near the 1981 original. And in that original one, which it was part of my VHS collection right next to my Star Wars movies, and I adored and I watched it just as much as Star Wars. And in that 1981 Clash of the Titans, we have Calibos. We have this disfigured monster-looking man who was once a human, but Zeus punishes him for his evil deeds, and his kingdom is the swampland, this forever dark and foreboding place from which he operates. And what I really, really enjoyed him when I was a kid, first and foremost, remember I said earlier in this podcast that the way he looked, he struck fear in me because there is something recognizably human about him, but in the way that he acts and the things that he does and the way that he looks is anything but human. And he's also a very colorful character. He's jealous. He's hateful. He's extremely cynical, where at one point in the story, it seems like he vies for the love and affections of Andromeda, the same woman that the protagonist of the story is after. But it's not really love. It's cynicism, and it's for him. It's always about him. And that's his villainy, where the movie sort of tries to position him into this territory of a tragic fallen hero, but not really. because every opportunity that he's given to show his soul, to show his humanity, he goes in the complete opposite direction. And I always enjoyed it about villains. Another one, which is sort of kind of a strange one, my experience with the Terminator's films was I saw the second one on VHS tapes, and then the first one came out in theaters years after. And I don't know why.
I saw the second one first, and then the first one.
Right?
Enough.
So when you see the second one, it's just like, whoa, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's the badass, he's the versus the liquid guy, and it's just that confrontational thing that you enjoy as a kid. But when I went to see the original in theaters, I was genuinely terrified of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I knew who this actor was. I was maybe 9-10 years old. I saw it in theaters, and here's this cold killing machine, this battle tank, and the villainy and absolute terror comes from the fact that he doesn't share anything. There's no commonality between us and him. He can't be reasoned with. Remember, he can't be bargained with. Kyle Reese's words. He is here to kill you, and he will never stop until you're dead. And when each time I rewatch that movie, I have it on Blu-ray, and I see that particular moment, I'm like, what a fantastic villain. There's nothing redeemable about him. There are no soft edges about him. He's all straight corners, and he's just there in for the kill. And I think that makes for an absolutely fantastic cinematic experience. And the last one I wanted to bring in was, of course, 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger.
I was going to mention Freddy Krueger as well.
Right?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I was gonna say after you mentioned Terminator, because I love Terminator, and I also love the Xenomorph from Aliens, and I think it's funny that both first films were very much more horror, and the second films were more horror action sort of things. I generally prefer the other two, but I know that the first two are slightly different genres. But I love Terminator films, some of them. But with Freddy Krueger, I always say with horror is something I was going to speak to you about, because horror is like 90% of horror films are about the villain, or at least especially the 80s horror that kind of came about when you've got Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Chucky. You've got all of the big horror franchises are centered around a villain. And Freddy Krueger, I think, is even though the films are not necessarily the best horror films ever made, it has the greatest idea, I think, in any horror film ever. Whether or not they execute it perfectly each time is a completely different podcast, but I just think it's the best, most genius idea of a villain, of how terrifying.
Because you don't know how to fight him. How do you stop yourself from dreaming? How do you stop yourself from experiencing something that is beyond you? He is the mysticism. He's magical in a sense. If we think about it, we try to identify what he is. You do not fight him with any traditional means. You fight him with this cinematic invention that if you stop fearing him in your dreams, where he can kill you in his dreams, but if you stop fearing and feeding his terror, then his powers over you stop. But to me, the reason that I was terrified of him as a kid, once again, I saw it in theaters, and I couldn't sleep for a month. We are from a generation where our parents were like, oh, what movie are you seeing again? Oh, okay, here's your money for the ticket. Like, they did not care, man. But when I saw it, he was the culmination of everything grotesque and anything that would terrify a 10-year-old kid. It was him. The glove, the disfigured face, the understanding that he is a child abuser. As a kid, you don't really sort of pick up that he's child molester, which is, as an adult, makes it even more grotesque and terrible. But as a kid, it's just him. And he was tossed into this oven, and his face is all. He is everything that is ugly and scary to look at. That's what he was to me. And once again, in the Terminator kind of sense, it's something that you can't stop, because you can't even begin to learn how to fight him in the beginning of the film. You're right there with all the heroes of the movie. It's like, oh my God, what do we do? Where do we go from here, 100%. So was that. Mike, so we kind of broke down our personal understandings of what villains are supposed to do and how they work against the heroes of the story, what makes the stories successful. Now let's overlay that, superimpose our ideas to the Star Wars films. And I sort of wanted to begin with the original trilogy to maybe, in a way, monitor the way that evolution of Star Wars villains happened. and how our understanding. I know that for you, you had experience of the original saga early on in your childhood, but it's really, you seem to center yourself around the Star Wars prequels, and I would like to get to them next. But first, we begin with the original trilogy, and it's sort of kind of like loose order of appearance. Obviously, Vader is the first one who pops on the screen on the on the deck of the Tantive 4, and we sort of get from him to Tarkin, and the Emperor is only there conversationally, but we're not just talking about the episode 4, we're talking about the entire original trilogy. And the first question I have for you is, what makes Darth Vader work right from the beginning, from episode 4 and all the way throughout to the conclusion of the trilogy?
I think a lot of it is that you see his strength from the start. First of all, he stands out. You've got the very white corridors of the Tantive 4, and you've got all the stormtroopers in their white armor, and he walks out black and imposing, does the silhouette, as you mentioned, and he is much taller than everyone, and he goes through, and one of the first, I think, speaking lines you hear him say is when he's choking Captain Antilles, and he's like holding him up from the ground, and he's commanding everything. Every rebel is trying to run from their shooting and things. Nothing's working. They're just running. And I just think from then on, you're like, okay, so this person is dangerous and they're commanding that. And the whole film is these characters trying to get these plans away from this being to someone else. They're trying to rescue the princess. Everything kind of leads to him at the start. He set off the whole chain of events. And so immediately when you see him, I think he's so powerful and things. And then you get to episode 5 and you get the main hero. It's been a few years and you think, oh, the hero is going to maybe try and do something against Vader. He's going to try and help him. He's been trained by Yoda. And then he gets absolutely decimated, just like straight away. Well, not straight away. It's a really cool fight. But when you see that happen, you're like, well, even Luke is the only person really who has any chance. And he just got completely owned. Vader only really survived that long because Vader let him. Like Vader was trying to just talk to him basically. And he still had his hand cut off and those sort of things. And then in 6, it's slightly different because he has the turn, but you still see his power is always there. His authority is always there. Comparing him to Tarkin, they're two very different characters, but obviously Tarkin's only in episode 4. Did you want me to talk about Tarkin as well, or just
we'll get to Tarkin as well for sure. But it's also I'm listening to what you have to say. I'm thinking along the lines here, like, oh, okay, you're kind of like sparking my imagination, my ideas here, and I just really enjoyed the fact that you're right. We are never given the opportunity to really sympathize with him because he maintains as a central axis of evil, I would argue, throughout most of the trilogy. First of all, he has the most time out of all 3 trilogies. He has the most time as the villain. In the original A New Hope, the Emperor is only alluded to this supreme power, but you really see Vader on screen as the main drive behind evil. He is the guy who executes all of the plans. He's the one who's like, get me this, scour the ship, get the droids, let's go, after these rebels, they're not going to touch the Death Star. He's there. He commands the whole operation. And in part 5, where we see the great revelation that, look, I'm your father, we're not given enough hooks from his point of view, a look on the story, that in order for us to begin to associate with him too much and say, oh, I kind of feel for him. It's not about him. It's always Luke's journey to try to discover his father in that robot, in that cyborg. And that's what makes him such a successful villain, that until the very end, he is the absolute villain. It is only at the end, only through the drive and tenacity of the main hero, Vader is truly destroyed and Anakin Skywalker is reborn through it.
And also what George Lucas does very well in episode 4 is when Obi-Wan goes against Vader. And Obi-Wan is the whole, he's the catalyst for Luke. He's the one who opened the universe up to Luke. He's the last, basically the last Jedi apart from Yoda. He's got these strange powers. He's got a glowing sword. And then he ignites his blade and Vader ignites his. And Vader's is red. And immediately, that's just storytelling 101. As soon as it comes up, completely black silhouette has been killing people the whole time, ignites a red blade against this basically sweet old man wizard with a blue blade. And as soon as you see that clashing, it just really hyper focuses everything on the struggle of good versus evil. And that's one of the things about Star Wars that works really well with the lightsabers, especially.
Totally agree with you. The iconography of the Star Wars, the visual look, the photography of it, it's a huge, huge part why those villains are memorable. Because, cinema is such an interesting medium when, let's say, because obviously everything is flawed. Nothing is absolutely perfected. So sometimes when you have something in the script that doesn't quite connect with what the director's intent with is in that particular scene tonally or something, again, when they relate to the character, but you can then complement it and reinforce that idea through visuals, right? And then you if you know what you're doing, you have the right cinematographers by your side. George, what if we put our lights over here and we cast this here? Or in terms of Kylo Ren, that we'll get to the sequel trilogy where half of the face is red, half is blue. It's the argument to be made is that a lot of us, we extrapolate and we, kind of like project our own thoughts and world experience onto that. But it's also an art for an artist, for a filmmaker to have enough conscience to say, like, look, I'm going to put this here and put this there, and let the audience try to figure out what this is all about. Whether intentional or not, I think it has nothing to do with it. But in case of Star Wars, I do believe that was very, very intentional. Mm-hmm. But back to the story, we were discussing visuals. We're talking about the cinematics of it. You mentioned Tarkin, and the question that I wanted to ask you is Tarkin, but also the Moffs portraying the military elite. You and I, we have talked about the accents in Star Wars, and we kind of highlighted all of these brilliant British actors who had tiny, itty-bitty roles, but they added so much to those movies. And I wanted to ask you, as far as the villain's utility goes, what is the Tarkins and the Grand Moffs' reason to be in the films? What is their contribution to the story?
I think they're to add layers to the Empire. So it's not just, Darth Vader, some vague emperor mentioned once or twice, and then loads of stormtroopers. Because that could be just that could be a guy on a ship.
Yeah.
Once you add the Moffs in and the way they talk and how high up, and you can notice all the different ranks, you're like, oh, there's a hierarchy here. Without having to say the Empire's been about for however many years and there's millions of people. No, you just go, here's a boardroom of old people basically talking about what it's like at the moment, the old days, the like Senate and things falling apart and etc. And them having these tags on them that show kind of rank. And you've got this commanding authority. Once you have the hierarchy, it then just adds so much depth and weight to it all. And when you see Leia interact with Tarkin, she knows who he is immediately. So there's that hint of, is he a public face? Do people generally know him that well? I know there's mentioned because he's a governor as well as the Grand Moff of Eriadu, I think. And so it's like, when you get these interactions, people know who he is. So once you get that, it opens up what the Empire truly is. And I think that works really well, not only with his power and, him destroying Alderaan and things and the power of the Empire there, but I just think that scene in particular really evidences the hierarchy.
Yeah. And, when I think on Tarkin specifically, because he is the most authoritative of all of those Moffs, he is a very interesting contrast between Vader, because he's a different sort of villain. Vader is protected and guarded by all of his body armor, and he's machine, he's mechanical, he's imposing. But Tarkin doesn't have anything of that to stop his humanity, to stop being a human thing. Pause for a second and say, like, oh, okay, I represent this military, but is what we're doing okay? Is destroying an entire planet just to get to the rebels okay? He never questions that. So in a way, he is a demonstration of what the Emperor's evil is all about. That he makes people, he converts otherwise intelligent people into these husks, these unemotional puppets who are just there to do his bidding. And they never question their actions for once. No. This is in the name of the greater good. Often you hear a lot of Star Wars fans who are like, oh, screw the rebels. It's all about the Empire. They were trying to reestablish order. I'm like, guys, did we miss the message here? What George Lucas was trying to say? This is the whole idea of when you don't question your actions and there is no one to criticize you, this is what you lead up to. So in a way, Tarkin is even more grotesque and villainous because his particular evil is intellectual. Unlike Vader's. Vader is there who's passionate with the sword, and maybe there's this baggage there that he betrayed the Jedi Order. And I'm just going conceptually by what we see in the original trilogy, not necessarily touching the prequels. We know the ideas that what kind of like turned the Vader into it, whether it was jealousy or something that his interactions with the Jedi, even though it's never detailed, we understand there's some kind of story there. That's what drives him. But with Tarkin, there is nothing there in his outward appearance to show us why he's this way. He just is, because he's heartless. He doesn't have a heart. And moving on from Tarkin now to his master, the last question I have for you in regards to the original trilogy, then feel free to add any extra thoughts that I kind of perhaps didn't give you the chance to elaborate on. The Emperor is, and I will call him the Emperor for the sake of this trilogy, before he is sort of reinvented, and then we get the Chancellor Palpatine, or Sheev Palpatine, added story to it. The Emperor is this ageless shadow figure who shows at the end of the trilogy, and I wanted to know, does it bother you that we're never told the background, his story?
I know it bothers you. I know that you love the Emperor and you weren't as much of a fan of prequel Palpatine. But I grew up with, when I was first watching Star Wars, Phantom Menace had already come out. So I already saw him immediately. I saw the original trilogy first before it. But because it was already a buzz, I already knew he was going to get a backstory. I just was like, oh yeah, so he's a guy. So he's basically, and that's kind of...
He's a guy?
Yeah, and that's kind of where you and I think differ from it, is because I see it as a guy who rose to power, whereas you often see it as someone who you thought was beyond human, because the original trilogy kind of frames him in that way, with his unbelievable amount of power, especially against
a
Vader
wizard in
and
a sense.
Things. Yeah, like when you hear what Ben can do, Ben Kenobi, you're like, oh yeah, he's pretty strong in the Force. He can do a few mind tricks and things. It was the Emperor, so I can literally shoot lightning out my fingers, and you've got two of the strongest Force users in the galaxy here, and they can literally do nothing. Like, the only thing one can do is pick me up while I'm zapping someone else. So you just, this authority, he doesn't care. He talks to Luke, he's manipulating him. He's like, I already did it to your dad, I've got no fear. He gets his lightsaber to him and he just laughs, and it's like, that is, you get characters in 80s movies that don't flinch, but then you get him just looking at him with basically a sword there and just like laughing. It's like, yeah, I knew you'd do this. It's beyond, it's so many steps ahead. It's so beyond your capabilities and understanding with the Emperor that it works as this omniscient being in a way that makes him almost impossible to defeat. Whereas when you then get the prequels going into it, much like it kind of does with Vader, is that it adds a layer of humanity to it. And that takes away from some of the mythos of this being, of this powerhouse. You go, oh, it was just an old dude who was into politics for like 15 odd years and can shoot lightning out of his fingers. It's not quite the same as, it's a being who's so unfathomably powerful, he took over the galaxy and the Empire and things. Instead of that, it's like, oh yeah, he just kind of rose to power through kind of boring political means and a hostile takeover. It's like, oh, I thought he zapped his way to the top or something. I think that's where the prequels and the original trilogy kind of clash a bit.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that he works as a villain as is, and I honestly would not change anything about him. It's just, I think a lot of it is in the performance. I do apologize. Yeah, let's pause here for a second. Here, right? I really, really enjoyed your definition at the beginning, like how you just framed, like the villain roles in cinema. That was very, very wholesome.
Thank you. Well, I mean, the way you articulate things is very well as well. But I think it stopped.
It stopped. So yeah, guys, we apologize. We had a little bit of background noise there. We're back on track. So yeah, I was saying that I would not change anything about the Emperor, because a lot of it rides on the performance and his specific part in that story. He says, well, I am this snake that whispers into your father's ear, and there's nothing that you could do to get him back. He is in the way and manifestation of Luke's problems. He's like, hey, Luke literally has to sever his father from this other person in order to get to Anakin's ear and say, Dad, please come back, rescue me. Right? Because this is what Vader has to do. He has to destroy the Emperor in order for him to resurface. So I thought it was just very clever. As a kid, you never question things. There's enough of the Emperor there to show you what he's all about, what he's doing to the main character. And, everything that he threatens and then Luke defeats him, Luke overcomes him, and at the end you say, okay, yes, I'm satisfied, I'm happy. You never need to go back and discover. I think that is more of an adult mentality. I think this is a much more recent phenomenon where we went from books to book epic franchises, from a movie to television shows, and then there's added lore and expanded universe, and there's comic books and everything. It's a great thing, but it's a wholesomely different experience where now you know who your heroes and villains are, but because you get to enjoy so much of the story, now another author steps in and why don't we give you a little bit of background here and there? And it all goes on and on and on infinitely. But Mike, moving on to your favorite topic, the prequels. We have quite a few more additional villains. We have Darth Maul. We have Count Dooku. We have General Grievous. We have Darth Sidious. The first question I had for you is not within exactly the same format that where we started with the original saga. I wanted to get your bearings on this. Darth Maul is the executioner versus Darth Sidious, who's just a political mastermind. Two completely polar opposite villains as far as their function in the story is. Which one do you prefer more? Which one do you think works better for a Star Wars story?
Now, we'll keep it to the films because
Right.
I think if we include the Clone Wars series, my answer would be very different because Maul gets so hugely expanded in the Clone Wars series. And Maul is actually, in the Clone Wars, my favorite Star Wars villain, aside from probably Vader. But I think that visually, Maul is such a well put together villain because you can just see, in real life, you're not meant to judge a book by its cover. But when you've got a man or a being who's red and black faced with sharp teeth, yellow eyes, horns on his head, a double bladed red lightsaber, and says about 14 lines of dialogue and tries to basically kill children, it's like, okay, I can see this guy is probably not a goodie. So the actual effects of creating Maul was very well done and very, it's all that sort of red and intensity that you kind of get. It's the same sort of color palette that you get from Darth Vader with an ignited lightsaber. So you get that immediately. Whereas with Sidious, the problem is with Sidious is that in the Phantom Menace, it was made in a way that if you were a kid, you weren't explicitly told that Sidious was a baddie. But it was so unfathomably obvious that it's like, why do you even bother trying to hide it? Why don't you add more lore and have him, actively talking to someone in his chamber, telling people to go, and then him sneaking out by himself and becoming Sidious and watching his body language change a little bit. Like I've been watching Moon Knight recently, no spoilers or anything, but like when a character turns into a different character, the body language changes, the way they speak changes, those sorts of things. You get a little bit in Fight Club and other things like that, where when you have that, it would work a bit better rather than being, here's Palpatine, he's like basically a sweet old man and bad music plays whenever he talks to Anakin Skywalker, and then every now and then a hooded figure with the exact same chin as him talking in a similar voice. It's talking around the corner. It's like, well, I know it's him though. This is not, and it kind of feels like the film is trying to be like, when Revenge of the Sith comes around, it feels a little bit like the film's going, hey, you didn't see that coming. It's like, we did. No one in Star Wars has a chin like that. We knew it was him from the get-go. You've got the same actor to play Palpatine as who plays the Emperor. He even sounds the same. So, and you play all this bad music around him. So there's no turn, but it felt like there should have been.
Right.
And then him as a villain himself in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and even Clone Wars a bit. Yeah, he's a shadowy person, but he could almost be anything. He's just the kind of, I hesitate to say, almost like boring standard, he's controlling everything sort of thing. When you get into the depth of the Clone Wars, it's a bit more complicated, and where he pits the sides against each other, it's more clever. But in the films, it's just like, he's a puppeteer. It's like, okay. When you get him in Revenge of the Sith, although I do like him in Revenge of the Sith because he gets to unleash a bit more, there is that silliness and a bit of campiness to it, which is a bit annoying with the no bit. But aside from that, I felt like he was, when he fought Mace Windu, that battle, that turn when it happens, when he electrocutes Mace, that feeling of like, oh, he's out now. He's unleashed. He doesn't have to hide himself. I've seen what he can do.
The jackal comes out of there, Dr. Hyde,
Yeah, and he's fully out. And then he fights Yoda as well. Even though there's issues with that fight that people have with the CGI and stuff, it's still, you get that sense of power. He's literally just like, you're like, oh yeah, this is a politician dude. He can go toe-to-toe with Yoda and basically wins. And you're like, what How? You just kill Mace Windu and you've got all these things, and all these things are fitting together. And I just think in Revenge of the Sith, it all comes together so well. And when he does execute Order 66 in the way he speaks and things, and you just get to watch all these Jedi get slaughtered, that level of power, that kind of thing, you don't really get to see it even in the original trilogy. You get the lightning fingers and you get Alderaan being blown up and stuff, but you don't get that level of how powerful he is and how much control he has mixed with the physical attributes where you couldn't even fight him, even though he seems like a frail old man. So they're very different. One's just a brute and one's this beyond puppet master. But I think in episode 3 Sidious, it works really, really well. Whereas Darth Maul is very short-lived, but he served the purpose that he was meant to.
You know, if I were to score and give both of them kind of like grades based on their performance as performing their tasks as the bad guys, I would say that Maul wins with flying colors. I would argue that Maul succeeded as a villain long before the movie released, when all that preliminary material and advertising campaign, everything was coming out. People just saw what he looks like in a magazine and they lost their shit, man. Everything about him. You're giving me a space samurai / ninja with that evil Tengu mask who has a lightsaber? Let's go. Can we see like this movie today? Even though it was like a month in advance or something, I was picking up on the magazines in the library like, oh, that's it. You got me hooked to George Lucas. Let's go and see him. And he also equally works well in the film because he's very quiet. There's always this feral animal to be waiting to be unleashed, but he's always quiet, always reserved, always super focused on his target, whether it's a small little Annie, when he attacks Qui-Gon Jinn on Tatooine. My God, I was thrilled. That movie, if I remember watching it, and then my first pulse, was like this. Oh, okay, all right. I was ready, for more. And even without touching the Clone Wars, which to me, the Clone Wars series basically fully realized what George intended to do with this prequel trilogy. But just within the context of the film, I think he worked really, really well. He was very successful. As far as Palpatine goes, I feel the opposite. I feel that he was completely realized and made very intriguing when he left the screen. Meaning the expanded universe, the books and the comics, and when we really delve into this alternative life of something that the life behind the veils, how he manipulated all the politics, and James Luceno's Cloak of Deception book, where he goes and he plays the chess games decades before the Republic even realized, or the Senate realizes what he's up to. There, he really, really works. On screen, though, it's an entirely different affair. Because if you make your good guys, along with the hero, smart and intelligent, and then make the villain even more smart, then he really, really works. And he's interesting with that kind of like template. He's not really a brute. He's more of a genius, mastermind. But from the way that the lines are delivered, the way that he performs on screen, like you said, it is so on the nose, and it's so obvious that for me, he doesn't work to any capacity because he makes all the Jedi look stupid and incapable. I always ask that question, what good are the Jedi if they couldn't stop a simple Sith? And then we have to refer to material that began to arrive years after the movies came out with the expanded universe. Oh, no, but he hid in the Force. He has that magical Sith power that everybody forgot about. He just pulled it right back, and that's how he does his shtick. Well, for the purpose of the film, for the purpose of what's on screen, it is incomprehensible to me as a fan. Obviously, I'm very biased towards it, right? But you have all of your good guys sitting here in the same room with him, and they're, huh? What bad guy? Where? Oh, the Sith was hunting you, Qui-Gon? Let's forget about him for the rest of the trilogy when we're devastated with Order 66. Where are you going with this? It just doesn't work. But then the situation is compounded. I always, in my heart of hearts, I believed that Darth Maul succeeded in his task as a villain, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's victory over him at the end of The Phantom Menace was completely bullshit. It was obviously Darth Maul's victory just taken away from him, right? But And I felt that he was supposed to be a villain throughout all three films. But the issue is compounded because after Darth Maul is off the stage, we're introduced to two more villains. We have Count Dooku and we have Grievous. Why are they in the films, Mike?
I mean, I'm always in two minds about Dooku because I think Sir Christopher Lee, excellent Dooku. I think Dooku was, I mean, for a long time, Attack of the Clones was my favorite film. When I was a kid, like when I was really young and it first came out, I used to watch that on VHS on repeat. Used to love everything with Dooku in it and his sword fighting style and everything. He's a really good villain. But I feel like what should have happened is that Darth Maul should have either been killed and not cut in half completely. He should have maybe been seemingly killed and then came back and basically did everything that Dooku did.
Right.
But it was him. It would have made a much more rounded character and a lot more scary to have him someone who kills Qui-Gon and then, Obi-Wan thinks he kills him, but he doesn't at the last minute. And they're like, where? And then maybe the last 10 years, the Jedi have been searching for Maul and they just can't find him. And all their focus is on Maul because they think he's the master. They think he's the problem. And it's Sidious behind that. But what happens is you get this disjointed part where in the second movie, where, like, to compare it to Empire Strikes Back, Empire, you already know Vader's the villain. The Emperor gets mentioned in brief. You get that one hologram and things, but it's still very much about Vader. In Attack of the Clones, they're like, okay, yeah, the villain's gone. We still aren't revealing Sidious yet. So here's another one. And it's Count Dooku. And it's like, okay, so who's Count Dooku? It's like, oh, he was a Jedi. Right. But he's not a Jedi anymore. Okay. But he's definitely not bad. Right. But he's clearly he's the only new character in this film. And he's got a red lightsaber and all these other things. Like, we know he's bad. We know as soon as he starts talking, it's Christopher Lee. And like, we know he can do a villain. So he comes into it. And although I really like him as a character, I'm just like, why didn't they just either have him initially in the first one and have something like that, or have Maul just come back and do what they did in Clone Wars of Maul and just have him playing Christopher Lee, him playing Dooku? Because I really like Dooku, but it feels like an unnecessary complication to add.
I totally agree with you. I think as years go by and I get to appreciate more and more of the clone era through the extended material, just recently listening to the Dooku Jedi Lost, what a magnificent book. What a brilliant character. And then we see, obviously before that, we see Dooku starts in the Clone Wars series. What a fantastic, fantastic character who has this rich legacy with his planet and the Sereno family and the whole lore surrounding that. Now that I look on it, how Dooku is only picking up steam and becoming more and more popular with fans as his lore is being expanded and expanded and expanded, it almost feels like, hey, it's not through his fault of his own that he doesn't work in Attack of the Clones. He's out of place. He's a third wheel. But in and of itself, he's not a bad villain at all. I would argue he's an amazing villain, but you just got to use him properly. And I felt that spotlight, that groundwork was prepared for Maul. Like you said, if we were presented with this evil face, that the Jedi are constantly on the lookout for this guy that they almost killed, that they had to maim, but he escaped, and he becomes to this like demented, crazy creature that we see in Clone Wars, but only that is happening in the prequel trilogy of films. And then at the end, we see the Emperor unleashed. Then we wouldn't need Dooku. We could have just left Dooku alone. Just imagine a scenario where we first encountered Dooku is in the Clone Wars. And we say, oh, hold on a second. So not all the Jedi thought alike. And this guy obviously left the faction because they're religious zealots who can't accomplish anything good. They just can't even recognize a single Sith sitting in front of him. Well, this guy maybe knows stuff that they don't. Let's hear his story. Let's hear his side of the events, He's very, very interesting. He just there was no room for him in the films.
And one thing that's kind of frustrating me that I've only just realized now as well is what I would have actually loved instead is if they had Dooku in the first one and he was secretly behind everything, as in when Sidious was talking to Newt Gunray, if you had Dooku kind of doing that, but the audience didn't know, there was always a hood over his face, but you couldn't see his chin at all. And you had Dooku as a Jedi in that. And then he has an argument with he in that is like doing the sneaky stuff because he doesn't believe in the Republic. He wants there to be the Empire and that sort of thing, like he does in Attack of the Clones, but he does it much earlier. And then the end of the film, what happened is instead of Darth Maul fighting Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, it's Dooku, who is still Qui-Gon's master, or was Qui-Gon's master. And you have this thing where he he changes, and you see him fighting with a blue blade at the start of the film for them, but something's a little bit off. And then at the end, you find out that wait a minute, he's the one who tried to do this. He's the one who's been manipulating us. And then a moment where maybe he changes his lightsaber crystal or something and he ignites his blade and then it's red instead of blue. And then he has the fight with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, kills Qui-Gon. Then when the second film starts, he's already the villain. You already know what he's done.
Right.
And that would mirror, I think, the original trilogy in some ways as well, which would be quite interesting. And I think, so what happened to Obi-Wan would have then happened to Luke in that sort of way, you know? And so it's that kind of, I feel like that would have worked better, and Dooku could have worked so much more if we knew about him. But Attack of the Clones, the dialogue was so rushed trying to figure out who the hell he was. I did a whole podcast on Star Wars Comics in Canon, one of the earlier ones I did. Well, I just did a biography of Dooku. I had to go through so many dotted around sources. It was after Dooku Jedi Lost came out. I had to listen to that, which is obviously fairly newish to the canon.
Brilliant book, man.
It's brilliant. And then there's the Master and Apprentice book by Claudia Gray. That's excellent. That's got some flashbacks of Qui-Gon and Dooku. And then there's an Age of Republic comic. And then there's a few other sprinklings around. And I've got like a vague-ish idea of when he turns to the dark side. And obviously he was also involved he was basically manipulating Sifo Dyas to get the clone army made. This is not explained in the film. You get one line to vaguely say, oh yeah, there's a clone army by Sifo Dyas. Who's that? Don't worry, he's dead. Okay. And then it just, in the prequels, just never gets addressed again. And you're like, and Dooku's so enwrapped in that. And I think if they'd have established him first, rather than trying to establish him in the second film, they'd have had that room in the second film to be able to further explain his backstory, why he turned, what happened with the clone army, to lead into episode 3 a bit more. I think that could have worked so much better.
Yeah. In other words, we would have to reconfigure and change a lot of things with the prequel trilogy. I think it goes without saying that as much as we love things in Star Wars, it could have always been better, more time spent just at figuring out what each character's reason is in the plot, and all of the things could have been done differently. Notice how we didn't get to General Grievous, and we're going to actually leave him in the dust and move to Star Wars sequels, because that's how important Grievous was to those plots. But anyway, now we are in sequels. We are in a new generation of Star Wars where it seemed like they wanted, at least they felt to me, the drive to try to spice things up and approach it from a slightly different angle, a desire to innovate, so to speak. So we had Kylo Ren, we had General Hux, which I'm sure will have a few words to say about. And then we have this Snoke, and of course the coming back of the Darth Sidious. Is Kylo Ren a villain?
Yeah, and he's also my favorite part of the sequel trilogy, and he's one of my favorite villains. I absolutely love Kylo Ren. Yeah, he's definitely a villain. Unfortunately, you and I both have similar opinions on the Rise of Skywalker and the problems that it has, and I think it does ruin Kylo Ren a little bit. I wanted him to go full heel and not redeem himself, but I mean, he causes mass genocide. Or is at least complicit in it with The Force Awakens. He attacks numerous people. He kills Han Solo. He tries to kill Luke. He does a lot of damage. One could almost argue he does more damage, or at least the same kind of damage that Vader does in the original trilogy.
Right.
So he is definitely the villain, even though in Last Jedi he gets a bit more sympathy to him, and then in The Rise of Skywalker he turns back. He's still definitely, I'd say, the villain. And if the whole trilogy was made by one director, or Disney or whomever kind of had the idea of what they specifically wanted to do before going into making 3 films, if they had a game plan, they would have made it more clear. Because what was, Kylo, they set him up in Force Awakens, then Last Jedi went in a slightly different direction, which still really worked, and then Rise of Skywalker brought him back, and it was a bit jarring. So I think the story, unfortunately, writing does not help Kylo Ren as a villain. But yeah, I would definitely say he's a villain, and I absolutely love Kylo Ren as a villain. I think Adam Driver does an incredible job portraying him.
He's brilliant. I really, really enjoyed him. How do you find the difference of his dynamic with Rey versus Luke's and Vader's in the original trilogy?
In Vader and Luke, it's obviously the father and son thing, and it's also Luke is somewhat missing a guide in certain ways. He finds it in Yoda, and he finds that he needs one in Obi-Wan, loses Obi-Wan, then finds Yoda, and he has that degree of it. But part of it is that he's never had the full family. He's always been Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. He's kind of had this element missing from his life the whole time. With Rey, it's kind of similar, but with Rey, she's just looking for someone who kind of understands her. And
Mhm.
it's a different dynamic. Luke wants someone to kind of guide him and to not quite take care of him, but he seems a bit more young and not quite needy necessarily, but kind of searching for that thing. Rey does a bit in The Force Awakens, but as it kind of changes into The Last Jedi, she just wants to find an equal in some ways. She wants to just find someone who kind of understands her plight.
Yeah.
And I think what Last Jedi does is it shows that Finn, as much as I like him as a character, he starts to just pine after Rey and become kind of just boring by yelling her name all the time. And I think Last Jedi is kind of showing she's outgrowing him. She's in another level to so many people around her.
Yeah.
Kylo Ren understands that. He's at a similar level to her, just on the other side of a war. And I think that Last Jedi really changes the dynamic a lot, and it adds that sympathy. But in The Force Awakens, you still get the backstory a little bit, but he's much more of the heel. He kills Han Solo, he fights him at the end, it's bad. In Last Jedi, you get the pull and stuff, but then Rise of Skywalker just kind of flips it a little bit, unfortunately for me.
You know, in the original trilogy, it's always about Luke trying to find his father, right? Once he learns the revelation is there for him, he's like, this monster here, this cyborg, this machine is not my dad. I have to go and find him. And the miracle of the person reemerging there and like looking for him. And for me, Kylo Ren didn't resonate as much as a villain because I never found him threatening. Things happen in the films. Planets die. Yes, the Starkiller base gets to shoot things, but not through the agency of Kylo Ren. We don't know who built the Starkiller base. We don't know who commands the entire troops. Kylo Ren is clearly not in command until he destroys Snoke, and we're going to talk about it at length. But to me, he didn't have that command. Just like young Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace was just too young to influence his life. Other people had to do it for him, so you can effectively call the first movie The Adventures of Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and by the way, Anakin Skywalker. It's their quest, right? He's just not capable of doing that. In the same way here, Kylo Ren is not capable of being the true villain. His villainy sort of kind of like amps up in the Last Jedi. You know, obviously, at the end of The Force Awakens, he kills his dad. In the second one, he almost murders his mother. But I found him very compelling character. To me, he was a lot more of a fallen tragic hero. And his dynamic with Rey was very interesting because he challenges her. You know, she represents the past. She's always looking the answer to who her parents were. She's always looking over her shoulder. She's not sure as a young person how to step through life. So I can understand fan criticism saying that she didn't go through enough rigorous training. But to me, it was justified because if it was lacking there, her emotional journey was there of trying to figure out who she was as a person. And Kylo Ren was there every step of the way, challenging that. They're almost like on equal grounds from the beginning. He's not a true Sith. He's not particularly trained. And so she isn't. But he tells her, let go of your past. And once they sort of start doing their force Skyping thing, which I absolutely adore in the films, and they start realizing they both of them are missing parts of themselves, and they find it in one another, I totally get the sexual tension. I totally get their attraction. I totally get the kiss at the end. That's one of the stuff that I absolutely love about the sequels, even though The Rise of the Skywalker. That final kiss at the end, I totally understand it. It's not where it's like, hey, baby, I love... No, it's not about that. It's, hey, I wish what the spark that ignited between us could have been there, stayed there longer. But thank you for what you have given me, but I have to let you go now. And there's that kiss. That kiss of understanding, I guess. But besides Kylo Ren, we also have other henchmen. We have General Hux, and we have the First Order. I wanted you to compare them to the Empire. How do they work as villains for the sequel trilogy?
Well, I will say, just back to Kylo Ren for a moment.
Right.
I will say that I think you're right in a lot of elements of what you said. I think the difference between Kylo Ren and Vader is that Vader from A New Hope and only really once in Empire do you find out he even has anyone really above him. He's got Tarkin, who's kind of at odds with, which is kind of what Kylo Ren and Hux's relationship's like. But in The Force Awakens, you're introduced to Snoke immediately, who's one step above them both. And I think that puts him on a leash immediately.
Mhm.
Whereas in A New Hope, you're given the impression that the Vader's doing all these things because he wants to, as opposed to Kylo Ren's doing it because he feels like he has to. Especially when you find out he's
Like a
Han
spoiled
Solo's-
brat.
Kind of, yeah,
Mhm.
in certain ways, but being pushed in a direction. Anyway, with Hux and the First Order. So I always say I love Hux. Well, I loved Hux in 7 and 8. I think in 9 they completely destroyed him for no reason. And I think that his scene, I know you aren't as much of a fan of, the scene where he's yelling, "This is the last day of the Republic," and then the Starkiller base blast goes up, and it's the very fascist Nazi sort of symbolism
Right.
there. I absolutely love that. I think Domhnall Gleeson does an excellent job. I think that he is intentionally he wants to be Tarkin, but he's not there yet. And I think that works for me as that character because it gives Kylo Ren that edge that you kind of know. The only reason Kylo Ren's not really trying to kill him in a sense is because Snoke's there as trying to not allowing him to do this.
The leash holder.
Yeah, exactly. And there's that moment, and it's one of my favorite short moments in any of the Star Wars films. It's just tiny. And it's in The Last Jedi when Hux finds Kylo Ren on the floor after he had the interaction with Rey. And you just for a moment see him open his coat to reach for his blaster. And then you see Ren move. And then he just puts it back.
Yeah.
And he's like, you would have shot Kylo Ren dead. Like he's on the floor, bars. Like, you would have shot him. And we know you would have done that. And that's such a sniveling thing to do. Even Snoke mentions it. And I think he's ruthless enough that he would shiv you. He would stab you in the throat. But Kylo Ren is the one person he could never do that to under any normal circumstance. So he's kind of fought his way to the top by being ruthless, even though he's a bit sniveling and kiss ass. He's got that ruthless kind of streak to him.
Yeah.
And he's unforgiving in his way when there's no second guessing when the Starkiller base all happens. You know, there's none of that stuff like in the boardroom in A New Hope with Alderaan where they're like, you know, should we use the power of the Death Star? Should we, you know, the discussion. For him, it's like, I'm doing this. And when he does that, you can see that the only thing stopping him from getting to the top is these people with these magical powers that he just cannot, no matter what he does, he cannot one up. And I really like his dynamic with Kylo Ren. And I wish we had more of that. And it's another reason why I don't like Sidious coming back in Rise of the Skywalker. I wanted them to still be at odds at each other. And Hux trying to stab Kylo Ren in the back and Kylo Ren overpowering him. But I think they did it in Rise of Skywalker. They did it far too literally. They're like, oh no, he'll literally destroy the entirety of the First Order to make Kylo Ren lose. It's like, what? Like
that's a great point. That's a great point that you bring, because partially what really is distracting is that how much of buffoons both Hux and the First Order are. Like you never believe in their authority, whether it's the performance or the lines that they say. Like not even the military jargon works. Like everything that they say just bark the most obvious things. Fire the cannons. Like, yeah, we know they got to fire the cannons, versus the kind of like radio comm things that you hear during that attack on the first Death Star, and when all the commanders report their findings. I will assume full responsibility and apologize to Lord Vader. The kind of things, the exchanges that they have are very, very important, because there's so few of them. They have to be on point in order to paint the canvas for us what the Empire was. And with the First Order, every single line, a minor actor shows up on the screen and they say something, it never strikes home. It is always a miss every single time. Even when they have good actors, I believe they hired a couple of really good prominent actors for the Last Jedi, the commander of the ship that Poe Dameron destroys with his bombers, and then in the final film, the guy that shoots General Hux in the chest.
Richard E. Grant.
Brilliant actor, right? There's such notorious. He has like beautiful, history with films, and just none of them work. Like, oh man, so for me it was a big downer with the First Order, and I guess General Hux was partially part of that. That streak kind of like rubs off of him. But I do agree with you. There's a sniveling part, the kind of like the kiss ass / kind of a snaky kind of character. He could have worked much better. And unfortunately, both from the heroes and villain sides, this sequel trilogy was populated with just too many legacy characters that did not need to be here. They needed to give more room to the new cast in order to develop the relationships more. And unfortunately, didn't happen.
I think with the First Order as well, it was meant to show them as younger than the Empire, which they were. You know, the Empire had been around for nearish 20 years by the time of A New Hope, whereas in Last Jedi, they'd been around for a couple. You get the impression it's a couple of years, but they're not the
decades
entity in power. you know, and then, so I think that that's one of the reasons where a lot of them are quite young. But what they didn't do is they didn't try and explain, okay, some of the older people here were in the Empire and they're the ones to help the Imperial Remnant. It never really explains where it came from once again. I'm not saying it necessarily had to, but when you've got a thing where it's like, if you're going to show them as younger and more desperate, the First Order feel, they don't feel like they're ever in control. They feel like they're scrambling for power. But it feels like they were kind of trying to show that while also showing they were in complete power, and it felt a bit disjointed, rather than being like they're struggling for power because of, you know, the Empire never fully went away. It disappeared. It's been regrouping. Now that it's their last desperate push to come back. If they were kind of talking about it in that way a little bit more, then it would have made a bit more sense, where it was like, okay, they're younger, they're more desperate. But it didn't come across that way. It was just kind of like, oh, that might be the case, but they also might be as powerful, if not stronger than the Empire. And it's like, so are they one or the other?
I will be very curious to talk to you about the Imperial Remnant when you finally start making overtures to the Star Wars Legends novels and you see how they portray the Imperial Remnants post-Emperor's destruction, how they kind of like try to gather their forces again. That will be a very interesting contrast. But let's quickly move on to The Last Jedi and Snoke's untimely demise. Did we need to see him more in this trilogy, or you were satisfied with how much we have seen?
100% satisfied. I'd have said even less, if I'm honest. I didn't want Snoke in it from the start.
Yeah.
As soon as he was in Force Awakens, I was like, this guy's just the Emperor. He's boring. I don't want another Emperor. I shouldn't have said that out loud. It's my fault, guys. The Emperor came back. Because I was like, when Snoke died in The Last Jedi, I was like, yes. I was like, this is what I wanted. This has changed things. This is going to make it fresh. Kylo Ren's going to be the baddie. It's going to be Kylo versus Rey. We're going to get something different. No, let's just put Palpatine in there. So good, great. Just boring it up. So I really liked them getting rid of Snoke when they did. I think it made The Last Jedi more fresh, more unexpected. That throne room scene is still some of the best choreographed Star Wars I've seen. It's incredible. And the whole part of it, you are rooting for Kylo Ren. That's where he kind of veers into the anti-hero side. Yeah. Because you can see, he's had to do this the whole time. And when you have sympathy for the villain, you root for them more. And then when he's fighting against Rey, it's like, oh man, this is tough. And then when you see him interact with Luke after that, Kylo Ren, it just adds so much more weight because like he's in complete power and he doesn't really know what to do with it. So he's just full panic mode, kind of desperation once again, going after Luke. And
he transforms into a boy when he screams in those walkers, more, more, more. You know, he's stripped of his authority completely and he's turned into a child. And the reason for me that Luke's Obi-Wan Kenobi mode kind of works in that scene is that he's there to teach. He's here to instruct. He's not here to defeat you or to demoralize you. He's there like, look, if you will pursue this path, you will always be alone. Come back, kid. See, he was like, winks, see you around, kid. I was like, I get it.
Yeah, and with Snoke, I think he's a plot device, and that's what he should have been. I think that the problem is they shouldn't have had him in Force Awakens, or if they did, they had him just once, right at the end.
In The Force Awakens, you're absolutely right. The big throne room and CGI effect was completely forgettable. For me, it was the only part of the Force Awakens, plus the secrets within the droid kind of thing that kind of bothered me. But overall, I had a wholesome experience watching TFA in theaters. I loved it. But then when we saw Snoke in The Last Jedi, you're absolutely right. He is that gear in the machine where you get to a point where Kylo outsmarts him, outwits him, and kills him downright. You're like, oh, all right, that's his role? Nice. My boy Kylo, let's go. Let's see your villainy. Let's see your badassery kind of here. So that was kind of like interesting dynamic there. But we also have Palpatine's return in the sequel trilogy. Do you think that it was planned or contrived as a reaction to fan criticism addressing Rey's force abilities that we needed to kind of like explain away why she's so powerful?
I think it was 100% reactive. And the reason I am certain of this is because you can check out, was it Colin Trevorrow's original script? Or
Yeah.
And it was, so he literally wrote the script and they said no, and then wrote the one about Palpatine. So it doesn't, I don't want to sound like a dick here, but it doesn't really matter what people say. We know there was a script made for the ninth film that was made before the script that they used. It didn't have Palpatine in it. They wouldn't let someone write an entire script and not have Palpatine in it and then not want to go with it for Palpatine when he started writing it. They wouldn't have done that. They would have said from the start, right, we want a story with Palpatine in it. That's what you got to do. That's what they would have told him. They would not have. Disney are not in this department. Disney would not have wasted this person's time and even allowed the script to get to the point where he could actually release it to people to look at.
Yeah.
If after they decided to not go with it, because or if it leaked or whatever. But still, it's one of those things where it's just like they did not have it in there. The Last Jedi evidenced that. The Last Jedi would have been a perfect opportunity if as Last Jedi ended, you just had one thing like a Palpatine's laugh or something. Yeah, you'd have got it. Or in The Force Awakens, if you'd just had this figure that was controlling things from the shadows and you didn't know who it was, but you never saw Snoke in person, and then it was Palpatine manipulating the holo feed, that'd be different if you added breadcrumbs. But they didn't. They literally let someone write a script which didn't have Palpatine in. So it clearly wasn't the plan initially. And then with the fan backlash, everyone said a lot of people said The Last Jedi was too different. They wanted more similar. So Disney took the wrong lessons and then chose the most boring, obvious character ever, completely ruined Kylo Ren's redemption, because when you make someone who's worse than the main bad, it makes their turn less valuable because they didn't make the decision by themselves. They're like, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. So
right. That's an excellent point. Yeah.
And I want to clarify, Ian McDermott's performance was brilliant. I think the scenes when Kylo Ren goes to Exegol is amazing. The lighting,
visually arresting.
When the film started, I was like, I don't want Palpatine to be in it, even though I knew he was. I thought the crawl was stupid, and the fact we didn't get to hear Palpatine's message, you have to listen to it on Fortnite, is nonsense. And it's actually a really cool speech as well, which is quite annoying. And then you get to see him, you're like, oh, this one might be dark. This could be cool. There's all Sith alchemy. Maybe we're going to learn about the cloning process. No. You're going to get a throwaway line and a few CGI Snokes in a tank, and then you're going to have to read the expanded edition of the Rise of Skywalker to vaguely get breadcrumbs of there being cloning. And it's like, you didn't think this through well enough. You just basically copied a concept from Legends that people weren't that much of a fan of anyway, but maybe actually did it worse.
Yeah.
Even though I like the machine that he's on and that movement stuff.
This is straight from the Dark Empire. 100%. You look at that and compare it to the comic book, like, oh, okay, that's where they got it from.
Yeah, but they didn't choose some of the cooler parts. They chose kind of the more boring parts of it. And it's just like, if you're going to take from Legends, you got to build upon it, or you got to do something new and different, which is what I wanted the sequel trilogy to be, which is why I like The Last Jedi so much. And I think just that final battle is just so uninteresting because you know exactly how it's going to end. As soon as I saw Sidious in it, I'm like, okay, well,
the non-violent victory with the two lightsabers, like, oh, I'm all the Jedi. Like, where's the duel?
Yeah, there's no big duel, which was annoying. I like the Kylo Ren Rey fight, but I just thought it was weaker than their fight in The Force Awakens and weaker than the Throne Room fight. And I was just like, okay, it's just CGI. He's shining a blue light.
But you know what I did appreciate right from the start? The trailer to the Rise of the Skywalker gave me all the wrong vibes. I immediately dialed down my expectation that I said, we're not going to get anything better than The Last Jedi. It's right there. It's 8 out of 10 for me. I think I've got my level of excitement out of this trilogy. Just relax with this new movie, whatever it's going to be. When I saw all the horses riding on top of the Star Destroyer, I'm like, oh my God, all right. This is going into that pure popcorn thrill Hollywood blockbuster kind of nonsense. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Star Wars, not this trilogy. It's not going to reach that potential of Logan, that a movie that goes outside of spectacle and actually creates a serious motion picture. Not with this trilogy. It's all right, okay. The Last Jedi got there the closest. But what I did appreciate from the start is that at the very least, J.J. Abrams didn't beat about the bush, and he didn't rickroll Palpatine into the script. He's like, the beginning, hey, Palpatine survived. We got to defeat this guy.
100%.
Right from the start. They go in, he's there, he's doing things, and at the very least, you can appreciate the cinematography. At the very least, you can appreciate Ian McDiarmid's performance is straight, continues right from the Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. Every voice, every little thing, every mimic is just so grotesque and ugly, and the presence is there. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of digging. I'm spazzing out as a fan. If I can't enjoy the script, it's not what I wanted it to be. At the very least, I can isolate, compartmentalize, and say, hey, I like this part over here, I like that part over here. So in the ending, Mike, if you had the chance to, because guys, as we mentioned before, both of us are cinema experts. We know how to make good films. If you were to given the pen and the paper to change things around in the sequel trilogy, how would you reorganize your villains to make for a more compelling story?
I would make it so that Last Jedi up to there is pretty much fine, I'd say. I would reduce the amount of Snoke in The Force Awakens. I'd then have him in The Last Jedi as much as he was. Last Jedi I wouldn't change a huge amount about, really.
Right.
And then Episode 9, I would have Kylo Ren go full heel. I would have him go completely bad. I don't want a redemption story. I want him to just go over the deep end. I would want him to almost be so extreme that even Hux is like, what are you doing? Like, he goes mental. He's filled up with just dark side and he's going crazy. Maybe even starts killing his own men, but not to save the rebels, just because he's losing his mind.
Right.
And maybe even goes and finds like some Sith artifacts and things and starts becoming like corrupted with these ideas. And you could have Palpatine's voice there a little bit, but if he's like corrupted, he's got like Darth Bane's there, and like even Revan or any of the old school villains of like Legends, and he finds these artifacts and just talking to him, and he's like going mad thinking there's too many voices in my head, which Sith path do I follow, and just kind of going crazy with it all. And he fights Rey, who's trying to, you know, save the galaxy, that sort of stuff, and they have a massive lightsaber battle with force power shooting about and all kinds of craziness, and she's there like fighting him, maybe even tearing up, being like, Ben, I want to save you, and he's just like, no, and he's like throwing her out the way, and she's trying to, and he just will not let her, and then she beats him in some sort of way like that, like she defeats him in, however, you know, normally they do it in movies like some sort of cheap way, which I wouldn't necessarily want, but even if you did the standard thing where he somehow kills himself, which is normally how it happens with villains, I would just want him to really go full heel, because it just feels like Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, he finally had his own agency. At the halfway point of that film, he's like, he gets to make his own decisions. He gets to make his own mistakes, and he'll change as a character because of that. And then Episode 9 starts like, oh no, he's now just going to do exactly what Sidious tells him. And then at the end, kill Sidious. It's like, okay.
The very interesting point. The way like you make me look at both Episode 8 and 9, I'm like, I didn't think about it this way before. I would have... No, guys, notice how we didn't talk about Knights of Ren. I guess they're just as vital as General Grievous.
I was going to say that they're a waste. I wouldn't have had them. Either I'd have, you know, had them in The Force Awakens and then had them in the rest of the stuff, or I would have just wiped them.
I remember when the first images of the concepts came out. I think it was like 2014 or maybe even 13. And there's one image of Falcon just crash landing. I think it's like in the snow. It's a nighttime scene. And there's these Jedi hunters, these creatures with lightsabers. You could still Google it and find it. That one picture told me what this entire sequel trilogy needed to be. I never embraced or understood the idea of why would you take Luke, Hans, and Leia's sacrifice and victory in the original trilogy and reduce them down to size again. Like, oh, well, the good guys are small again. Now we have this overwhelming... It's been done before.
Yeah,
who are you making this movie for? When J.J. Abrams said, I need to reintroduce Star Wars, like, who are you kidding? Everybody seems to know this franchise well. Not you, obviously, if you have to make this such sort of statements. But anyway, what if you had a republic and you continue the thread of George Lucas's ideas of politics and how politics work in the societies, and how now this newly established alliance is rotting from inside? And it's ruled with corruption, and you have all these idealists who were such 20-odd years ago are now like fat-bellied, and they're not listening to Han, Luke, and Leia anymore. They want to divide and pillage and, you know, they gain their own power. What if it starts rotting from inside? And as Leia is still dedicating her energies to restoring peace and making sure, preserving that all the planets are now equally represented, she's representing the political front. Luke is training his Jedi, you know, students, and because all the cool stuff that is in the sequel lore is not on screen. The whole like Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxium, his academy being destroyed. Show it to us. Don't tell us about this. And what if you had these Jedi hunters, these infiltrators? Once again, the rule of two, the whole idea of the few Sith destroying the Jedi, and they kind of like infiltrate and start undermining everything that Luke is doing. Killing or converting his disciples, or hunting them down, or they're within the Republic, they're killing off vital, you know, proponents of peace one by one, or poisoning, or something is happening there. You could have basically taken the DNA, the formula of Star Wars, completely turned it on its head, completely did 180 polar opposite. Instead of one Darth Vader villain, you have a lot of small guys who are a cult, a sect, right? Instead of overwhelming Empire, you have seemingly the good guys. I mean, just looking at the current political events in the world without commenting at it too much, but sometimes the good guys who position themselves so are not necessarily the good guys, or what you're made to believe on screen is not necessarily what goes on in the real world. You could play around with those real world ideas and put them in Star Wars. It never happened. They were back to the skeleton of what was, and it seemed like they tried to add on top of it, but I guess I'm rambling on. Mike, I want to close up with my final... Go ahead.
I was going to say in that realm, I think that would be a really good shout, and I think they could almost... It'd be a nod to the prequels again, and it could be that thing of rotting from the inside, but you could even have some sort of like galaxy where maybe there's a bit of arguing going on, and there's the sex, because it happens in the Claudia Gray book, Bloodline. We've got centralists and something else, where it's like you either people who want a lot of the power to be in the core worlds, or people who want it to be more spread out and things. And you could have like that, and it gets more and more tense, and there's like almost a civil war to break.
Yeah.
Then some sort of galactic event occurs, not dissimilar to in the High Republic or something, but it's just this. Instead of being caused by anyone, it's just like a freak accident occurs, and it destroys lots of either worlds or causes huge amount of like issues and terror across things. And when that happens, it then causes the breaking point of the civil war. And within that, you've got people who are, as you say, like fundamentalists who are anti the Jedi Order. And they've been training for a while to try and take it down. They think it's rising too much. And then they use this event to fight them. So Luke's off busy trying to defend, the dark side and the light side, while you've got Leia and Han kind of dealing with the civil war. I think that idea would be great. And also I realized we didn't even mention Phasma from the sequels.
I guess it's obvious why.
Wasted character. Because like she could have been so amazing.
A non-character. She's just a shiny chrome armor.
Could have been so cool. And the book, Phasma,
could have been. The book was awesome. Guys, I suggest you read it. Mike, who is your favorite on-screen Star Wars villain?
I think I love watching Kylo Ren, no doubt. But I think it's got to be Darth Vader. I just think Darth Vader is one of the greatest villains in cinema and franchise history. There's no one that walks on screen and you see immediately, from the visual design to the way they interact with the way Vader interacts with so many characters, the breathing, how it used to be human and you can see it resembles it, but it's more machine than man. It's got a red lightsaber. Like every element of what makes Vader Vader was so perfectly put together in what makes a villain. And, although some may argue that because he redeems himself at the end, it takes away from him being a villain. I don't think it does. I think it adds to it in certain ways. But I just think even if you ignore that, if you just look at episode 4 in itself and episode 5 as well, I guess, he just does such a good job of being exactly what you want on screen. Here's something to fight against, something that you're scared of, something you can immediately recognize, something that's completely different to anything else you've seen in or outside of this franchise. There's just so many layers to Vader as a character. And even I recommend people check out some of the additional content that I know there's a lot in Legends, but like in canon, there's the 2017 Darth Vader comics by Charles Soule, and they're just incredible. They're so good and they add so much to the character. But on screen still, Vader's just one of the coolest villains of all time. And I don't think anyone could really argue against that. If you don't think he's the best, that's fair. But I don't think anyone could argue that he's not at least considered up there. What about you?
Vader. There's no doubt about it. Maul was a very, very close runner-up. I loved him all the way to the end of the film. He was my anchor with prequels. He was the thing I loved the most. I fell in love with him before the movies released. Like I wanted so much of him to be good, and fortunately, I got it via the Clone Wars show. And one of the most magnificent moment in Star Wars history, the Kenobi versus Maul showdown in Rebels. Yeah. It's magnificent. It's immaculate. I showed it to a non-Star Wars friend of mine. We just sat down and watched just that one episode, and he was blown away.
It's so good.
So it was definitely Vader for me. Mike, once again, thank you so much. I love sharing thoughts with you. I love hearing your perspective on Star Wars. Once again, the way that you just explain things and the way you inspire me to think about Star Wars in a new way, and I really, really appreciate it. Please remind everyone where they can hear your podcast, when they can check out your content.
Sure. So if you're on any of social media, go to @Genuine Chit-Chat, Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. I put snippets to my conversations on Genuine Chit-Chat on there. So 30-second to a minute long snippets. You can check out the one with Cavan Scott and any of the variety of other guests I've spoken with recently. I've spoken to other podcasters, actors, authors, all kinds of different people, comic book artists. So, check it out. I even spoke to Ben late last year. But also, if you're on YouTube while you're watching this, then you can check out my channel, Genuine Chit-Chat. Ben just put a link in the description, but that's where all my Genuine Chit-Chat conversations are. Some have got video, some are just audio, and my Star Wars Comics Canon episodes, which is where I go through a different Star Wars comic, I go through the plot details, and I talk about the many connections to other Star Wars content. So you can check it out. If you've read the comic, it can serve as a refresher or things you may have missed. If you've never read the comic, it's a good way to, get the information, get the broad strokes of the plot, get some understanding of the wider Star Wars canon without having to pick up every single comic. All of my videos are into playlists on the YouTube channel itself as well, so you can check between just conversations about Star Wars or ones which are about wide variety of other things. But if you like listening to podcasts and you're listening on a podcast app, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere like that. Just type in Genuine Chit-Chat or type in Star Wars Comics in Canon, which is on the feed of Comics in Motion.
Awesome. Guys, once again, I'm going to put the video link to all of your stuff, but also to Kevin Scott's interview. If you know the guy personally, tell him about me. I want to interview him. I do have like super tiny interactions with him on Twitter, but I kind of sort of feel a little intimidated, like asking him to podcast with me. I think it would be like a dream come true. I think you did an excellent job, man. It was like I was so engrossed listening. It was like, as much, as like when you create your own content on YouTube, I'll be frank with you, like you just don't have the time to listen to other people's stuff. And I personally feel bad for it. Like as much time as you dedicate to come over and be my guest, like I'm so grateful to you. And I feel like an ass and I don't go back and check out nearly enough of your stuff. We're like, he interviewed Kevin Scott. I was like, selfish in a way. It's like, I need to listen to this. Click. And just from there, you just take it off. It was so awesome. Anyway, guys, Mike and I will surely find awesome topics to talk about in Star Wars, but thanks for checking us out today. Once again, go to his channel. Please support all of his stuff. The stuff that he's doing is really brilliant. He's a super passionate Star Wars fan, and he's a prequel lover. Many of you are as well, guys.
I love all the films, to clarify. I think the original trilogy is probably the best trilogy, but I love the prequel trilogy unashamedly. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie, but I love all Star Wars movies. I love all Star Wars content in a variety of different ways. I think some is better than others, and I've been getting into Legend stuff a lot more recently thanks to Ben, so I'm very appreciative of that. And we also should be hopefully doing a Kenobi discussion as well before the show comes out. We'll hopefully be doing one of those, and then I'm going to be doing a Kenobi week-by-week discussion show on the feed of Comics in Motion. I'll put on my YouTube channel as well, because you came on the Book of Boba Fett one a few times, so I'll have you on at the very least one of those Kenobi ones. So anyone who's excited about Kenobi, which should be all of you, then we'll be having at least 2 discussions on Kenobi, both one before and during as well. I want to throw that in there because I forgot to say earlier.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. I think you and I will definitely need to sit down and kind of like, once the hype is really, really building, talk about our expectations. I think like I'm extracting myself and my point of view in this particular instance. I want this TV series to be especially good for prequel fans. I think it owes it more to that generation, to that demographics, much more so than it did to me. Even though obviously I want it to be great as well, but I think it owes you guys something truly, truly special. And you and I would love to sit down and just talk about it. It's like, hey, and especially if it delivers the good, especially if it's like as good as some of the best of the Star Wars, I think it will be generation-defining event. Let's hope for the best. Anyway, guys, once again, thank you so much for checking us out. Please stay tuned for more of our podcast. We'll see you next time, everyone. Take care.